Raise your staff and stretch out your hand, and you shall divide the water, and the people shall walk through on dry land. Oh well, worth a try. Well, it didn't work for me, but it did for Moses. We're about halfway through the book of Exodus now and reading the Bible in the year. So what are some of the things that we should be looking out for, and what are some of the lessons we can learn from it? Well, first we might like to think about what the book of Exodus tells us about God. And the book of Exodus is really significant because it marks a very important step in that unfolding revelation of who God is. We began with God being the God of an individual, of Abraham, and then he becomes the God of a family, then the God of a tribe. And now, in Exodus, he's the God of a nation, the Israelites, seemingly whether they like it or not. And within the book, we have these key moments of revelation where we can look back to see who God is. We have the revelation of God's name, I am who I am, which eventually comes into English as Jehovah. And we have these strange and often hard to understand passages about the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant. But the crucial point about those stories is that they tell us that God travels with God's people wherever they go. God isn't stuck in a cloud up in heaven or in a temple down on earth. God goes with his people. Second, it tells us a lot about who we are and who we are meant to be and how we are meant to live. And Exodus is one of the books of the law, as we call it, or in Hebrew, Torah. And we see that there is a response to God's revelation and all that God has done to God's people. It's not a free gift. There is a call to respond, and that is to live in harmony with one another. And that is the purpose of the laws. And we'll talk more about that in another video. But the laws teach God's people to live in harmony, to respect one another. And they also, the book of Exodus crucially teaches us that God's people are meant to be free. They are not meant to be oppressed. They are meant to be free from oppression and to live freely. And that's why Exodus has been such an inspirational story for so many people over the centuries. Third, the book tells us something about the Bible itself. Now, just like the River Thames now looks like one body of water, it's actually, of course, made up of lots of different streams and tributaries that have flowed into it all the way back to Oxfordshire. And so it is with our Bible. We see the finished product, but actually it's made up of lots of different levels and streams and contributions. And we see that particularly in Exodus. And when we read through it, we'll see how the beginning bit looks much more like the stories in Genesis, much more straightforward narrative. Then it goes into just long descriptions of the tabernacle. We have these law codes, and we have other bits and pieces that seem to be written at different times. And that's because they've come together over the years, with some of the oldest texts often being the most hard to understand, and then later comments from editors who are trying to help their contemporaries to understand what is going on and the implications for today. Fourth and finally, and of course there's lots we could say about Exodus, but just 4 things for today. Fourth and finally, we need to see how Exodus is a story that doesn't happen just once within our Bible. And the Exodus narrative is something that we could call, in very posh biblical language, a meta-narrative. That is a big story. It's a story that we see repeated. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, we'll see as we read through the Bible how many references there are to the Exodus story itself. And especially in places like the Psalms, there are lots of references to the parting of the Red Sea and to all that Moses did. But this story of what happens in the Exodus is repeated. So God's people are oppressed. God raises up an individual to help them, to lead them out of disaster. They have to go through times of persecution and trial. Often the people are divided and they criticize their leader, but ultimately they are led to freedom, to liberty. Now, that happens very clearly in the Exodus narrative, with Moses being raised up and leading his people literally through trouble, through the Red Sea, and through the Sinai Peninsula into the Promised Land. But again and again, God's people are in trouble. They cry out. God raises up a deliverer, be that a prophet, a king, or a leader. They face trouble. They face internal divisions, but ultimately they are led to redemption, to freedom. And This story, of course, is crucial for understanding Jesus. And it's a story that all of the gospel writers, but perhaps especially Matthew, have at the back of their head when they're trying to understand who Jesus is. Again, God's people are living in slavery to sin, as we would see it. God raises up a deliverer, Jesus, who redeems, that is, buys their freedom, frees them from their sin, and leads them to the promised land, to the kingdom of heaven. And only by understanding the Exodus story can we really understand what is going on in the Gospels and some of the many allusions we find there to the Exodus narrative and language like redemption and salvation and freedom. I hope that you are able to get through Exodus. There are bits of it that are quite tough to read, but we can talk about it when we meet together, either in person or online. And I look forward to seeing you again soon when we think about the book of Mark.